So welcome back, everyone. Next, we'll turn our attention to the critical infrastructure and energy generation needed for the transition. We are pleased to present the report Speeding Up Renewable Energy Permitting in Europe, Overcoming Implementation Challenges, authored by Professor Catherine Banet, CERRE Academic Co-Director and Professor at the University of Oslo, and by Professor Filippo Donati from the University of Florence, who is joining us online. Following the presentation, we'll have a panel discussion moderated by Annika Brack, CERRE's Director of Energy, Mobility and Sustainability. Now, without further ado, I'll hand the floor to Professor Catherine Banet and Professor Filippo Donati to share their insights on this important report. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Christina, for the introduction, and hi everybody, both online and in the room. It's my pleasure to present this freshly published report, since it was published this morning, that we have been working on, and I would like as well to extend my thanks to the sponsor of this report, Terna, and a special thanks as well to the Danish Energy Agency for all the good inputs we got from you. We highly appreciated, among other as well partners that we have discussed with. The report takes as a starting point the situation of lengthy, complex and multiple parallel permitting procedures for renewable energy generation, but as well grid connection and related reinforcement of a transmission grid that have been identified for a long time already as a major barrier to the further development of renewable energy. It delays target achievement, but it also increases project cost. And this contrasts very much with the need to increase the share of renewable energy sources in the system. To address this remaining shortcoming of the energy transition, the European Commission has been initiated a series of legislative and policy initiatives, and some of them have resulted in new legislation, notably the revision of the freshly revised Renewable Energy Directive, so RED 3, as well the revision of the TenneT regulation and the implementation of new provision through the Repower EU plan from 2022 into the electricity market design reform. And we also had from before emergency regulation from December 2022 that also included speeding up provisions. There have also been some soft law initiatives and quite a few around notably the European Wind Power Action Plan, also pointing out the need to speed up permitting on onshore and offshore wind. In May 2024, the European Commission updated its guidances on good practices to speed up permitting granting procedures for renewables, the designation of renewables acceleration areas alongside a recommendation on auction design. And by the end of this year, the European Commission will publish the results of the assessment of the implementation of the permitting provisions in the TenneT regulation. And we have to mention that, I'm sorry, Annika, the Draghi report identifies the reduction of permitting delays for all new clean energy projects as a key instrument to attain both decarbonization and competitiveness in Europe. The CERRE report that we are presenting today provides first a mapping of all these new key provisions that are defined in European legislation and that aim to accelerate permit granting procedures. We have a full list, but just to name a few, they concentrate on the development of manual of procedures for permitting granting procedures, the planning and mapping of areas, identification of renewables, acceleration areas, special status for the renewable energy project, opening for prioritization, time limit for permit granting procedures, procedures, simplification of permitting, including the simplification of environmental impact assessment requirements, digitalization of permitting, capacity and skilling of authorities, accessibility of permitting authorities with even more one-stop shop approach, and judicial review and alternative dispute settlement procedures. So the report aims to contribute to the current discussion on the manner to accelerate and simplify renewable energy permit granting procedures by taking stock of all these new legislation and new requirements and the policy initiative that came as well at the same time or later, but also identifying key implementation challenges. And that's really the contribution we want to make, is looking at, based on this mapping, what are the implementation challenges and how to overcome them. Because we had very many new requirements that have been defined, and now the member states are in the phase of implementation. The recent infringement package that was published in October showed that only Denmark managed to notify the implementation, the transposition measures for the directive, so we have quite many member states that are still working on that. And therefore, the report focuses on implementation factors of success within the existing legal framework, so not proposing yet another legislation, but focusing on how to implement this best possible. And it analyzes the constitutive building blocks from planning to judicial review such effort must be based on. We identify a series of implementation challenges that needs to be addressed. And we have a series of 7 implementation challenges that we list in the report. And just to identify these implementation challenges is in itself already an outcome, we would say. The first one, and we can come back to the content later on, but it's first the definition of permitting granting procedures and a clear scope of what is the start and the end of a permit granting procedure. It could be actually very difficult to have a clear understanding of where does it start and when does it end. And it is a complex task in practice for both the authorities and the project developer, with varying national permitting regimes to be covered under these provisions. And the revised Renewable Energy Directive refers to, as the permit granting procedures, all relevant administrative procedures. So this could be very extensive, and the report stresses the challenges in defining this exact scope for the procedures at national level. And an important additional criteria introduced in RED 3 is the relation to the start of the permitting granting procedure and the acknowledgement of the completeness of the permit application by relevant authorities as an important moment. And this leaves, therefore, discretion to the competent authority for determining when an application is complete and put as well pressure on the project developer to make sure that the application is complete as soon as possible. The second implementation challenge relates to the interplay between planning and permitting that can't be mutually supportive and be better coordinated in order to solve some of the issues such as coexistence or local opposition very early on. The third implementation challenge relates to parallel but interlinked permitting procedures. There are many different procedures, and not only on generation side but as well connection side that are relevant for the life cycle of project development in order to make it come to practice. The fourth challenge relates to the differences in repartition of competences for permit granting among national authorities. Could be many different authorities, including municipalities, involved in such processes, and just from the top-down approach, imposing some deadlines or some procedures could be a real challenge. The fifth implementation challenge relates to prioritization of renewable energy projects over other projects, and this is including for judicial review, dispute settlement procedures, and appeals. The sixth implementation challenge relates to the need for balancing exemption regime and safeguards. As I mentioned, some of the requirements relate to exemptions provided to some of the requirements such as environmental impact assessment or consultation procedures, but we reach here a point where we need also to have safeguards towards certain exemptions, notably environmental protection or safety standards. When providing exemptions, additional guarantees to both project developers and competent permitting authorities should also be provided to ensure legal certainty for both the project developers but as well the authorities. The seventh and last implementation challenge relates to the balance between common and technology project-specific rules. Indeed, we have some general rules applicable to all the projects, but we have many specific rules, deadlines, or permitting procedures that have been inserted into the legislation, and this could challenge a level playing field between technologies, but as well between countries in the implementation. So the list of identified implementation challenges reveals the dynamic, but as well the remaining tensions between attempts to harmonize permitting procedures at EU level and the remaining specificities of national permitting procedures that often rely on very different and intertwined permitting procedures at the national level. We also in the report include several case studies. We have one in-depth case study that has been performed by Professor Donati, and we also have some other more simplified case studies and mapping. We do stress the particular use of national best practices and sometimes bad practices in the phase of implementation. This is something that we know very well for environmental legislation implementation, but here we see that because of all the challenges I have mapped, we also need to rely on best practices to improve implementation. So this is the case here, and to support the conclusions, we have an in-depth case study on Italy and a more general overview of some trends in other countries. It also includes specific sections that look at the implementation of acceleration permitting procedures in other technologies, because we see that this is a trend in other sectors and technologies. For example, the floating storage and regasification units connected to LNG terminals and transmission networks, or in the Netherlands and Germany, there have also been, in addition to Italy, such speed-up procedures for FSR's use, and for new nuclear reactors in France, notably. So, Filippo, do you want to say a word about the Italian case study?
Thank you, Catherine. Just a few words. You have said enough. Just to say that the part dedicated to Italy tries to analyze how the European Union measures aimed at accelerating permitting procedures have been implemented. And we have found many obstacles, many challenges. The main one is it's due to the landscape protection decision of local authorities that tend to block any project of a certain size due to its unaesthetic features, and this creates a lot of problem. We have also underlined how the legislator has tried to overcome those obstacles and put Italy finally in line with the European Union requirements. So the big challenges that Catherine has highlighted remain in Italy, but I would say that our report underlines that the legislator is trying to overcome those obstacles.
Thank you, Filippo. So we hope that the report, by bringing awareness around implementation challenges, will support both public authorities and project developers in their effort to comply with the new requirements in order to see this project realized in concrete. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for your presentation. I would like to invite our panelists to the stage. So we have Vera Brenzel from TenneT. Vera is the Director of Public Affairs and Communications at TenneT, and you've worked with the Commission, you've worked with Eurelectric, with a big energy utility, so I think you're bringing a wealth of experience here to the stage. Then I'd like to invite Enrico Maria Carlini, the Director for Grid Planning, Interconnections and Permitting at Terna. You're an electrical engineer by training, and you've also have lots of years of grid planning to bring here to this panel. So this is fantastic. Martha Kjeldsen, I'm sorry for the pronunciation. Please join us on the panel. Very proud to have the best in class here on the panel today. As we heard, Denmark is the only one that hasn't been told off by the Commission for not implementing RED and the like. And Paula Rey-Garcia, welcome to the panel. You're representing the European Commission as the Deputy Head of Unit for Renewables and Energy System Integration Policy at DG ENER. Welcome, everybody, to this panel. I would like to start out by asking you your reactions to the report, your reactions to the key implementation challenges that Catherine has presented, and perhaps starting with the two practitioners here on the panel and then moving on to the public sector.
Thank you, Annika, and well, hello everybody. Yes, I thought the 7 points were spot on. And I like to put that into a little bit, of a graph, First of all, it is super important that we think of where do we want to go. And especially in Germany and the Netherlands, we believe in a target grid. So basically, what would a net zero grid look like? I think we also got it echoed in the Draghi report again, that, he claims, well, you should enhance infrastructure because that is the basis of competitiveness, no electricity, no industry, no jobs, no growth, no investments. So we believe in that, which means that we are obviously planning huge amounts of investments, but it also gives us the opportunity of standardizing, etc. And the report picks it up, coming back to the report, picks it up. We need some sort of standardization also for the supplier market. So the vertical standardization is, let's get planning, permitting, those, basically those processes aligned. Basically from the European Union to the federal level, I just look at federal level in Germany or in the Netherlands, and then down to the province level or to the Länder level in Germany, and then just one size fits all. It is easier also to train people. It is easier for OEMs to produce and to test things. And then the second level is the horizontal. Get one understanding of what permitting is across the EU's 27. So, for example, I think a hamster is a hamster in Germany as well as it's a hamster in Italy. The population might be affected differently, but it is super important that we get that straight. And I think you pointed out very well in the report.
Thank you. Thank you. So my perspective about the report summarizes very well the ongoing activities that Terna is having in Italy to meet the European target and national target. So the main findings of the report resonate strongly with the Terna effort and also with the Italian regulatory framework, especially in light of a revision of the Renewable Energy Directive and the emergency regulation measure. The report emphasizes very well the complexity of the permitting procedure and also the delay in the renewable power plant deployment. So this is an example also in Italy. This mirrors the challenges that Terna in Italy is handling in the new request of connection to the national grid. We have a huge amount of request connection to the national grid. Some things has been done in the past, has been progressively improved. In fact, you can see some number about the new power plant, new renewable power plants in operation in the last 3 years, we see that the trend will increase a lot. For instance, in the 2022, we put in operation 3 gigawatt of the new RES plant, solar and wind. In 2023, around 6 gigawatt of the new plant. This year, we should close to the 7-8 gigawatt of a new power plant. So the trend sounds good. And if we increase a little bit this trend, and we maintain this trend for the next 6 years, we are able to reach the European and the national target in the electricity sector in 2030. So this is an important step. Another important things of the report is the emphasis on the technological innovation and digital tool. So the report promotes the digital platform to streamline and to increase transparency in the permitting processes. This is an example of Terna. We launched this year in June a new digital platform called Terra that have the goal to monitor and the grid project and the authorization processes. So this is in line with the transparency that also the report emphasizes. Last point, very important for us, also emphasized in the report, is the stakeholder engagement and stakeholder involvement in the early stage of the planning process. What we say in Italy is the participatory planning. So we launched this process a lot of years ago to involve regional authorities, local communities, cities in general, in the early stage of the planning phase, to reduce the criticalities, to reduce the local opposition, and also to facilitate a smoother project approval. So these are these main 3 things in the report that is quite in line with what we are doing in Italy in the transmission sector. Thank you.
Thank you. You already touched on topics that we might pick up again in the discussion on the participation element. Martha, I realize I didn't really explain who you are. So you're head of division at the Danish Energy Agency, the Center for Green Electricity, and you actually have the mission to help quadrupling renewable projects on the ground in onshore, I think, in Denmark. So no easy task.
No, yeah, that was our government's goal for 2030, is a quadrupling of wind and solar onshore. And it's also our division that's implementing the RED 3. And I think the key findings of this study resonated very well with us. So, of course, initially we were a little bit disappointed that there wasn't a big grand solution we hadn't seen, that the problems that we face are very similar for all of us. So I wanted to give our perspective on like 2 things that takes up quite a lot of room with us right now. We are knee deep in the implementation of the RED 3. And I think one perspective of it that makes it difficult, it's always difficult when implementing EU regulations, is that it takes a centralized approach in planning for renewables. In Denmark, we have a very decentralized onshore planning. So we have to figure out how the logic of the RED 3 fits into our system. And that poses like, it's difficult at some points, but we can see also, we can see the idea, but we have to make it fit the Danish system. And that also like leads me to the next actual very practical problem we see in Denmark, is that we don't have enough people that know enough to do all these projects. So we need to have people in all municipalities who can deal with quite complicated legal text, environmental law and planning law, and they also have to deal with a lot of interests at stake at the same time. So this requires quite a lot of skill sets, and they are simply not there at the moment for the push that we're seeing. So what we're also trying to do with the implementation here from a government or state view is we really try to make a playbook for them so that it gets as easy as possible, so that it can come out and live very fast, because like as a lawyer, I know that like it takes 10 years to rub the law into the world, and so we don't have 10 years. So it's a responsibility for us on the state level to really translate what it is the RED III is about. And so that's like an added complexity, I think, that we need to help as much as we can, because the resources are not there at the moment.
Yeah, thank you to make that point, which we also hear from other regulators across Europe, that they grapple with the reality of implementing the rules that come from Brussels. And I'm sorry, that's not an easy introduction. I would
no
hand over to
problem.
you.
So no, thank you very much, and thanks also for the very interesting report, and for both aspects in it, really the mapping of the provisions that are now in force, but also the identification really of concrete implementation challenges, because as it has been highlighted, really we have now the revised legislation in place, we have really a big increase in ambition, and the big challenge now is, of course, to implement it swiftly and to put it in place. And there are quite some challenges, not only on the resources side, but also on the fact that it touches indeed on different governance levels. So going a bit into the report, I would like to also stop at some of the implementation challenges that were mentioned there, because we think these are quite important. And one is really, as it was highlighted also in the presentation, the definition of the scope and the starting point of the permitting process. This, we think, is quite important, and in fact is something that we clarify in the revised RED, that is really, as it was mentioned also in the introduction, the completeness of the application, what really gets the clock ticking. We also share very much the point and the highlight on the implementation challenges of ensuring the consistency between the planning side and the permitting side. And I think here we have really tried to tackle the bottleneck that we see on permitting with such comprehensive vision, and looking really into how to combine this also with the related deadlines, which is also something that is quite important. So for instance, for the designation of renewable acceleration areas, we come in legislation with shorter and also with more targeted permitting procedures. And we think this is really a step in this direction of more integrated processes, both on the planning and on the permitting side. I think it's also quite important to touch on the prioritization of renewable energy projects. This is something that we see makes really the difference, and where we see that also progress is unequal at member state level. So what we have now in the revised RED on the overriding public interest presumption is quite important, and it's really something that will facilitate that projects meeting the necessary conditions. They also benefit from derogations where relevant of some environmental provisions, and this is really quite important also element in the revised legislation. So overall, I think also it's important to mention that one point that was highlighted in the report, which is the balance between provisions that apply across different technologies, so general permitting rules, and also technology-specific rules is also something that we have in the revised RED and that we consider to be quite important. So we have different rules that take into account, for instance, that for offshore, the lead times are longer, whilst for instance, heat pumps or solar equipment on artificial surfaces, then the deadlines can be shorter, or the procedures can be simpler in the case of repowering as compared to new projects. So also this element of fine-tuning the provisions were relevant to technology specificities, we think is also quite important. Thank you.
Thank you, and maybe I can follow up with a question, because I at first thought I had dreamt it, and I had to actually check again this morning, because I read yesterday in the media that there's a letter from 11 member states and organizations asking for yet another revision of the RED directive and tackling yet another legislative proposal for permitting. What do you think about that? And maybe also, Vera, you could also say something about how TenneT sees the success of the current provisions. Has it brought an acceleration?
I would start with that, maybe. Coming to Germany, Germany has, I was mostly hit as a country after the energy crisis, because basically going from, very gas-based to totally renewables and nuclear phase out. So basically there is no choice than really ramping up the new grids. We as TenneT, we really started to use the emergency regulation and did the permitting based on the emergency regulation. And now we're coming into the situation where we come into a sort of gap that RED 3 or emergency regulation, they're kind of basically cannibalizing each other, and we don't have the implementation of the RED 3. So that is something. But I mean, what does it mean in practice? In practice, it means that we have, I started at TenneT 4 years ago, and they had 120 kilometers roughly planning, building, and in the wake of being realized. Today, we have 3,500 kilometers of being planned in the permitting process or even being built. And the very large DC lines, those who are, supplying the southern part of Germany, where there's lots of industry, but really no, how would I say, no resilient energy, or how would I say that, steuerbare. So large power stations, we have 2 times 2 gigawatt already being built, Südlink and Südostlink, and that would not have been the case had we not really been able to work closely with the permitting agency. So I cannot really complain for Germany, I must say, but we need that implementation of RED 3. If we don't get that, and the 11 member states letter, I'll leave it to you to explain, to give your view.
Thank you. So from my side, I think that the speeding up the process of the permitting is essential to meet, of course, the European decarbonization target, but is a sort of trade-off between the public consultation for transparency and speeding up the permitting process, not only for the renewables, of course, for the connection of the renewable to the grid, but also for the reinforcement to the grid. In Italy, we have a situation is most of the renewables are in the south of Italy, is a sort of opposite situation of Germany, with most 80% of the new projects are in the south, but most of the consumption are in the north. So we have not only to connect the renewables to the grid, but we have also to reinforce the grid from the south to the north, from the island to the mainland. So it's important the speeding up the permitting, not only for the renewable, but also for the grid, for the reinforcement of the grid. So what has done now, as mentioned before, we try to improve the situation to give available for everybody a new platform, digital platform, for the stakeholder engagement, but also for the administrative bodies like the ministry, the regional authorities and the local authorities that are in charge of the permitting of the process, to better understand the situation and the status of each project. We mapped in this digital platform all kind of the constraints in the Italian territory. For instance, the environmental constraints, for example, the Natura 2000 sites or special protection zone, or some other kind of constraint like cultural and heritage goods, or other area with hydrological risk, agricultural area, industrial area. We map everything on the territory with all the constraints. We insert in this digital platform also the existing grid, also the data, the geospatial data of the new power plant, the renewable power plant, and also how to can evolve the grid in the future with the connection of this new power plant. We think that this digital platform could help everybody to monitor the process, to monitor the status of each project, and the deadline and the timelines of each project, and also the administrative body to a better evaluation in terms of the environmental impact assessment of this project and the impact of each project on the other projects. So this is our experience in Italy.
I think in regards to do we need faster permitting procedures or not, I think that we do, but what we see in Denmark is that it's not the actual permitting procedure that's the big problem. This speaks to the scope of when are you within the deadlines of the directive and when are you not, because what we see is what delays the projects in Denmark is field studies and everything they have to document in order to live up to the environmental law standards. And that poses a very big delay factor in the project, not as much as the time spent on the municipalities or the authorities' table, but more out in the world trying to prove that your project is in accordance with the environmental law, for instance. So for the second question of the 11 countries, I don't know what's in the letter. I haven't heard about it, but I would say it depends on what they want to change, because there will be something that would make a difference for Denmark as a member state, and there are some changes that wouldn't make a difference. So I think it's very specific to how do you plan in your country and what helps and what doesn't. And we have when we look at the barriers in my division, and when the government asks us, what can we do? How can we make this go faster? We always look at, okay, so what's the wiggle room here? And if it's legislation from EU, we know the wiggle room is very small. So we kind of look at, okay, so what national barriers do we have? So, but I think definitely in an European Union context, it would be to take a step into the sphere of environmental law and look at so how do you want to balance these two interests? Because where we stand, that's where it hurts at the moment. It's very, very difficult, and it's also what brings the local resistance against the projects, and that's what we see when the local municipalities, they don't want to take in projects, because they're not going to get re-elected if all voters hate it. So it's complex.
Yes, so I think from the Commission side, we cannot emphasize enough that the focus now is very much on implementation, so on really making sure that what has been agreed in the 2030 framework is now put in place, and also supporting member states in this process. And this relates not only to legislation, but also to non-legislative efforts as well. And I would like to name at least a few. So we have put already almost a year ago in place a plan already to support implementation, the so-called CERRE initiative. And we have been meeting with all 27 member states bilaterally, really to see how best to support in the process of implementation, to listen to the different difficulties like the ones that are being mentioned now, and to see how we can support in that effort. And we have also seen how to, let's say, be more reactive in that regard. So we also have an online tool, question and answers, where member states can really reach out with the different elements that we face when implementing the provisions. We have also come up with different guidance documents and recommendations, including on renewable acceleration areas, on permitting, and we have adopted all those in May last year. We are also setting up and working together with member states in a dedicated expert group, seeing how to implement those recommendations in practice in relation to permitting. So I think we have quite a lot already going on to support implementation. Of course, we need to keep monitoring, it doesn't stop there. So, and we have also the elements in the pipeline, for instance, the guidance on infrastructure permitting that is also part of the action plan on grids. we are also monitoring the different measures that are being put in place as part of member states' efforts and seeing how they relate to our recommendations as well, where more support would be needed. And of course, if there is a need, then for revisiting any of this, of course, that we will examine it when it comes. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before I monopolize here the follow-up questions, does the audience have any questions? Yes, please. I think there's a microphone on the way.
Hello, and thank you for the input given by the panel so far. My name is Ezgi Kızılocak. I'm from the German Federal Network Agency, and I have a question regarding the interdependencies between the different legal acts that has been introduced on EU level. The report clearly shows that there have been a few legal acts been introduced recently, as far as a revised TenneT regulation, for example, or even soft law with the EU Grid Action Plan. And for me, the question arises that not only how do we, on a national level, translate those provisions into national law, but also how can we have a common denominator when it, with the regulations within on EU level. For example, the Grid Action Plan emphasizes the accelerated permitting on new and already existing PCIs, and also the more efficient involvement of stakeholder involvement. And my question is, how can we summarize these with the revised TenneT regulation, for example, when the Grid Action Plan says it has to be accelerated? Does it mean that the already strict deadlines within the TenneT regulation have to be reconsidered or redefined? How can we harmonize the different provisions from the different legal acts and then translate it into national law? And also the role of the one-stop shops, for example, when it comes to this. So maybe the Commission can give some input on that, or maybe there is a guidance in planning for our role in this, because I'm from the section that is responsible for this area, so it's a personal interest too, so thank you very much.
It almost feels like one of our workshops, actually, when the regulators come together. So I think this goes to you, Paula.
Yes, I think there were
Maybe
some elements possibly for the study as well, if I understood correctly, but for what has to do with EU legislation. So as mentioned, there is guidance in preparation on infrastructure provisions that are part of the RED permitting. And then there is also, in relation to the TenneT regulation, a study now being undertaken that will be followed by workshops beginning of next year to look also into implementation of these aspects. So this could be also an opportunity to gather reflections like the ones that you are sharing. Thank you.
But if any, it just shows the huge complexity of the task and the many moving pieces, and that I think implementation is not a clear-cut task to just fulfill. I think it's important we keep this dialogue going across Europe also.
Maybe I could add one point. To be frank, I'm not a lawyer. I could not really answer, because what is which law has primacy? Because climate and nature kind of clash sometimes, but there are two big things that are underlying the underlying changes. So these are really paradigm shifts. The first one is really that you no longer have individual nature, on natural, because we have the administrative permitting where there is a lot of change too. But I'm talking about the environmental permitting. I do think what is the big change in the entire acceleration is that you no longer look at the individual animal or nature being affected, but at the population or at something equivalent. That has really had a big impact. And then you change the burden of proof. So far, we went to the permitting and planning process and waited until we had the very last piece of permit. And then obviously, it is who sticks more to the rules, us or the permitters. Today, we start already with the individual permitting elements. That also accelerates. And that goes across the PCIs, that goes across the grid action plans, that goes across the ONDPs. That is the philosophy, I would say. But I'm not a lawyer to answer that. And to come to the other side, which is not the nature side, but more the administrative side, I think that was at least the implementation of the big corridors in Germany. You just have very big highways like super fast line. So there is no longer a discussion whether it is left of the town or right of the town. There are big corridors, and that is being that was the third very big paradigm shift to get to a step change in speeding up.
Any further question? Yes, please.
Hi, again, Andrea Bodi from Hanover Communication. The question in this case relates to the permitting. As the Commission mentioned, they are doing a lot to support member states with guidance documents. I would like to know for the rest of the panel if they think this is enough, considering that implementation has always been an issue, especially on some of the energy policies, with member states up to, as far as I know, until a few months ago, still late on implementing some RED II requirements. So there's going to be still an issue going forward. And also whether or not you see some main gaps that still exist in supporting the faster deployment. We know that even in the target report, faster permitting is indicated as needed. What can be done in that sense, or if there's some other area that should be addressed beyond financing, of course, which is his own pillar.
What experience in Italy about the permitting of renewables plant? Most of the duration of the permitting of the renewable power plant is due to the environmental impact assessment that limit or lead to the time of the entire process up to 3, 4, 5 years. So this is a big issue. This is a bottleneck, the environmental assessment of the renewable power plant. We have some good example for the reinforcement of the grid. In Italy, we have a law that our national development plan is subject to the strategic environmental assessment. So we have the national plan and we have the environment report on the plan that detail the impact of the adoption of the plan on the environment. If the plan is authorized with a strategic environmental assessment, the project in the plan are not submitted to the environmental impact assessment. This is a good example how to speed up the process for the reinforcement of the grid. It's not for the renewable power plant. It's an example of the transmission infrastructure, pure transmission infrastructure. I agree that probably with the environmental impact assessment on the project of related to the renewable could be improved. I don't know in which way, but it's too long, the process now. This is the experience in Italy. I don't know if some other...
Yeah, no, I think we see the same problem. That's where it's difficult to strike the right balance, and so usually it draws out in time, the EIA. I also think that, okay, so we are focused now on permitting for renewables, but I also think like at some point we're gonna have to talk a lot about hydrogen and infrastructure for that, and because it has to be an offtake. The quadrupling of renewables in Denmark is not based on the individual consumers' consumption. It's based on hydrogen and the expectation of a different way of selling the energy. Yeah. So we also have to start looking at the broader picture, I think, for permitting. Otherwise, we're going to sit here in 5 years and talk about why hydrogen isn't moving. Or yeah. So.
Maybe one thing. I mean, what we see is that we have an economic slump in Europe. I think, especially in Germany. But what we have a sort of disconnection of electrification and economic activity. Electrification is taking place, and this is not only the renewables that need to be connected, and the policy, guidelines, but it is really digitization. So we have a lot of data centers. ChatGPT uses a lot. Bitcoin alone in Europe has the consumption of Portugal. So it's huge and it's massively underestimated. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, well, obviously grid connection is also for storage, hydrogen, as you say, and we see with great grief, what it means if you have congested grids, a huge connection queue, and that the IEA basically comes to that conclusion. But on the other hand, you also have to absorb growth, and we are doubling our exercise per year, and you need the entire supply chain that follows. And I think it is a moment right now where we also think about staggering, basically, pushing some of the lines later because it's just too big and everyone is building. The railway is building, the autobahns are building, and we compete on those markets too. So what does happen? We have a sort of greenflation in that element. So I think we have to take all aspects into account, also the affordability aspect.
Yeah, thank you both for reminding that bigger context. And I think the European elections have provided us with that pause to rethink actually some of the approaches and think about the system overall and hydrogen coming in and the bigger context of load growth, which indeed is a topic Paul pointed out earlier, which is not so much being discussed yet in Europe, but which will come for sure. Perhaps we have a little bit of time left, so I'd love to ask each of you, working on all this, how optimistic are you about our renewable targets with the tools at hand? Will we be able to reach them? And if you were able to make a wish, what would that be? And then I would like to also pass the word to Catherine, maybe a closing word on the panel as well.
I think the 2030 targets are well taken into account by industry, by supply. I do think that, at least in the electrification sector, we also have to think about the non-ETS sectors, and there it gets a bit more complicated. And it's up to the new commission to pick it up with the industries that have a structural issue as well. But I think even if 2040 targets might be very ambitious, I think after a review, maybe sort of reality check, it is important that we have those targets, because only by backcasting we can do those exercises, like standardizing, like taking best practice, by using economies of scale, and also introducing possibly a different topology. I mean, we're talking about DC, meshed overlay grid, rather than AC point-to-point connection. And these, in the end, can only be implemented if you think big, and then try to reduce it back to your thing. And you can only think big if you have silver bullets or targets or yardsticks, milestones to achieve. But I guess this is going to be decided at a political level. My wish would be that let's keep the 2040 targets, maybe review where it is, where it needs review, but don't lose our goal out of sight.
From my side, I'm quite confident that we can reach the 2030 target in the electricity sector. I don't know into 2040 and probably in 2050, what I see is 4 main bottlenecks. The first one is huge amount of the request of connection. This put a lot of pressure in the administrative bodies to process and to permit them. In the same time, a lot of pressure for the local opposition and the public opposition, local acceptance, because in so many areas we have a high concentration of the new plant. It's not so easy to explain to the local people how to integrate them from the environmental point of view. The third one is the duration of the environmental impact assessment. We have to find a way to reduce them. I don't know how. And the first is the last one is the coordination among the different authorities, because sometimes we have some grant permit from the national level, regional level, local level. We can reduce inefficiency in this way. Thank you.
So I think, so targets is political, like you said. It's a choice of how you want to measure, but it's a change that we have to make in society because of where we're at with climate change and everything. So I don't know if Europe is going to reach its target or not. I don't know enough about it to say anything on that. I think in a Danish context, our numbers look okay. The projections are okay for our national target. But yeah, I think we're going to also have to have a discussion on the whole, like, is it the proper tool to measure? Because do we want to plaster the whole Europe in solar? And how do we want to do this? I think it will be a bigger discussion as the closer you get to your targets, then what? Yeah. So, but it's just on my own account. But yeah, it's a.
Yes, no, thank you very much. So I think it's quite clear that the member states have quite a lot of homework to do if we are to meet our targets. But what we see and what is really giving reason for optimism is the fact that there is really recognition across all member states on the importance of really addressing this challenge and looking into these bottlenecks that we see for permitting. And I think it's fair to say that it requires quite some effort. There were some references already to the new, let's say, paradigms that we see are now in legislation, and I think one that is really also quite important is the focus now, increased focus on strategic planning, and that is demanding. And at the same time is also a big part of the solution, because it really helps reconciling environmental protection with renewables deployment and bringing also local communities in. So it's something that is worth the effort, let's say, but of course it's an investment. We also see that this is happening. As I said, we were seeing lots and lots of measures being implemented in our monitoring of what is happening at different levels, not only at the national level, but also more locally and regionally, and how really there are more and more, let's say, good practices coming in also on the permitting side. But of course, as mentioned, this will not stop only with renewable projects. It needs also to look into infrastructure, into grids. So it's part of a, let's say, broader effort to be able to deliver on the targets. So they are broader than what it seems if you go into the details. But as said, we really see that there are positive developments. We see also progress really bringing new numbers on the ground. We see it in Germany also thanks to the use of the permitting regulation, but not only. So we are really very much looking forward to seeing also similar results across other member states. Thank you.
So I hear there's a lot of homework for the member states, but for the Commission also in keeping the targets up. So, Catherine, you have a mic. Perfect.
Yeah, so very quickly, and thanks again for all your comments and input. And the panel shows very well already some challenges or good examples of national implementation. I thought as well it was very striking to see the interaction between the common EU targets and national implementation, this dynamic that we see all the time in terms of EU legislation, that here is we are bringing one aspect of it, how do we go from targets to implementation and fitting that in a national legal tradition or system that is different from country to country. The role of the European Commission, I think, is very interesting to see how you, in this case, supporting implementation. So this is maybe, again, borrowed from environmental implementation, but this is coming now to the energy sphere in different way that probably we have seen before. And also the role of central administration and central government, as you stressed, in also helping in implementation. So that's maybe new administrative practices that we see emerging here. And finally, yes, the value of high targets. Are we meeting the targets? Are we too high targets? So we should keep high targets, because otherwise we will not. Well, maybe we will be halfway, except in some countries that are doing well. That will be all. Thank you.
Wonderful. And with that, I'd like to just commend you all for your daily work on this very, very big conundrum, which you will solve. So thank you very much.
So, thank you, dear Annika, dear panelists and CERRE academics, for your contributions to this important discussion.